Samson, God's mighty warrior, is the title of today's message, taken from Judges chapter 15, verse 1 to 20. We have three thoughts: reeling under an unequal yoke, verse 1 to 3, reeling under the effect of retaliatory anger, verse 3 to 11, and reformed for battle, verse 12 to 20. Samson is one controversial judge who is, on the one hand, by his God-endowed gift of strength, delivered Israel from the Philistines. And yet, we see the weakness of his spiritual life, yielding to temptation of an unequal yoke, caused him much grief and pain in his home life. How should we assess the spiritual state of God's people during Samson's times? His parents were pious individuals who loved and served the God of Israel and would not compromise their faith, knowing the will of God. But their son Samson cannot be restrained. He was stronger than his parents, and they could not dissuade him from committing folly by marrying a girl among the Philistines. There was a prevalent climate of spiritual compromise amongst the people of Israel, so that God allowed their enemy to rule over them. You see, there are times when we refuse to take a stand for the Lord, to do that which is right in the sight of God. God gives us over to our compromise. As we consider the success of the initial conquest of the Promised Land during Joshua's time and the subsequent defeats that came in the new generations that rose after, we realize that spirituality does not automatically pass from one generation to the next. Each generation will have to work out their own salvation with fear and trembling, each accountable for their decisions and the consequences of their choice. Therefore, it is paramount that children are taught while they are young, so that they can be shaped for the glory of God. We may say that Samson's parents failed in their duty to bring their son in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. He became too big to be subjected to their counsel. He had to choose to marry a Philistine girl. Proverbs 22 verse 6 says, "Train up a child in the way he should go. When he is old, he will not depart of it." The word train up means to initiate, to inaugurate. It means to develop and to form habits, thoughts, behaviors, discipline and instruction, so that the child that is trained would have in them godly disposition. And here is the imperative to train up, a commandment from the Lord for commitment by the present generation of adults in the training of godly men and women for the next generation. Child training is a holy calling. Who is this child? We say that the child is born into the family of Adam after the fall, with a natural tendency toward evil, whose will is in total bondage to sin. So there are two ways that is before him: the way he should go and the way he should do according to the arms of the flesh. So for Samson, though he was endowed with the gift of strength, he was a spiritual pygmy, we may say, little man spiritually, unable to take a hold of his own passion and put it in subjection to God's law. Romans 6 verse 6 to 8 says, "Knowing this, that our old man is crucified with him, that the body of sin might be destroyed, that henceforth we should not serve sin. For he that is dead is free from sin." Now, if we be dead with Christ, we believe that we should also live with him, knowing that Christ, being raised from the dead, dieth no more. Death hath no more dominion over him. For in that he died unto sin once, but in that he liveth, he liveth unto God. Likewise, reckon ye also yourselves to be dead indeed unto sin, but alive unto God through our Lord Jesus Christ. Let not sin therefore reign in your mortal body, that ye should obey it in the lust thereof. Neither you ye your members as instruments of unrighteousness unto sin, but you yourselves unto God as those that are alive from the dead, and your members as instruments of righteousness unto God. So here we would like to see that indeed for Samson, he was a believer, but an unsanctified one. He needed to be sanctified. He needed to grow in grace and knowledge of the Lord Jesus Christ. So Ray Pritchard, he said this, one of the nice things about Samson is that there's no question he doesn't belong in with the special saints. He belongs here with the regular people, or maybe the irregular people, as he puts it. At least Samson is a man whose life is understandable to us. He's a lot like us, and we are a lot like him. He's sort of a spiritual zigzag who goes up and down and all over the map. He's totally unpredictable, and that's what makes the story so exciting. We have seen his beginning, how Samson had it all. No Bible character, had a much more promising start in life. Then right out of the gate, he begins to make mistakes. It's one dumb move after another. He begins to, you see how he was going to trace his life as he begins to fulfill God's purposes. You won't be surprised to know that Samson wasn't trying to do God's will. He was just trying to get even with the Philistines. Isn't it so true? He was just angry because of what they have done to him, and he was just fighting back. So our first thought, reeling under an unequal yoke. And it came to pass, verse 1 to 3, within a while after, in the time of wheat harvest, that Samson visited his wife with a kid. The wheat harvest varied in Palestine according to the place and the climate, but usually it fell about the time of May. Wheat was sown in November or December period. So Samson visited his wife with a kid to appease her for the insult of leaving her so abruptly at the time of the wedding. The value of the present, as Matthew Henry puts it, was inconsiderable, but it was intended as a token of reconciliation. He came to reconcile with his wife, to make up for it, and he came with a kid, brought an animal to make peace, as it were, to reconcile, but he was rudely received. Her father forbade him to come near to her and told him that he had married her to another. And he also tries to justify himself in what wrong that he had done toward Samson. He says, I verily thought that thou hast utterly hated her. A very ill opinion he had of Samson. Right? He was measuring Samson like the temple of the Philistines. He thought that he would never come back again after what has happened, after the wife has, in a sense, cheated him to discover, to cheated him, to revealing his secret. And yet, you see here that he was not like that. He was still wanting to make good with the marriage. But here you notice that Samson's wife was given over to his best man. A very sad plight that you observe here. And now the father offers the younger sister to Samson. Of course, for Samson's friend to marry the wife of his dear friend, that's a man that is totally void of God's fear and has not the law of God in his heart. By Exodus 20, verse 17, we were studying. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house, covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, his ass, anything that is thy neighbor's. So the son-in-law and the father-in-law endeavors to pacify Samson by offering him the younger daughter. But it is an abomination to God. And Samson understood that the nation of Israel had forsaken God's law, and you would see that they are in a very sorry state of affairs, as the prophet Isaiah would rightly observe. He says, sinful nation, a people laden with iniquity, a seed of evildoers, children that are corrupters. They have forsaken the Lord. They have provoked the Holy One of Israel unto anger. They are gone away backward. Why should ye be stricken any more? Ye will revolt more and more. The whole head is sick, and the whole heart faint. For from the sole of the foot even unto the head there is no soundness in it, but wounds and bruises and petrifying sores. They have not closed, neither bound up, neither mollified with ointment. Your country is desolate. Your cities are burned with fire. Your land, strangers devoured it in your presence. It is desolate, as overthrown by strangers. And the daughter of Zion is left as a cottage in the vineyard, as a lodge in the garden of cucumbers, as a besieged city, except the Lord had left unto us a small remnant. We should have been as Sodom, and we should have been as Gomorrah. That was the state of Israel at that time, and it didn't get better. In fact, it got worse. The revenge of Samson took upon the Philistines for this abuse. Well, it was in a sense because he was in a sense publicly humiliated. Right? He was, as it were, representing the people of Israel, the nation of Israel, and he married a Philistine girl. And now here, not only was the marriage being torn off, but the Philistines has done great wrong to him. Right? You see how they had done great wrong. Verse 3, now I shall be more blameless than the Philistines. And he had done what became of him in offering to be reconciled to his wife, but she having rendered it impracticable. And so here, not only was he reeling under an unequal yoke, right? When we go about trying to establish relationships out of the covenant of God, it is a futile effort, as you see here what Samson has been doing and how things just does not turn out. And reeling under the effect of retaliatory anger, verse 3 to 11. And Samson said unto them, I will be more blameless than the Philistines. And he caught 300 foxes and firebrands and turned tail to tail and put a firebrand in the midst. So how did he catch the foxes? We don't know. But what he did was a tremendous feat. He was able to catch them, tied them tail to tail, and light the tails and get them to run wild in the midst of the Philistine plantation, and the entire or the plantations caught fire. And this was the menace that he did in his anger. Worsby said, violence breeds violence. The Philistines weren't about to stand about doing nothing while their food and fortune went up in flames. They figured out that Samson was behind this, and so they began to come after him, and they vented their wrath upon his wife and his father-in-law. They were burned. Right? It was a terrible end to the relationship. It was a bitter story of retaliation, trying to avenge the wrong one of another. You would see that much of the world that we live today consists of such behavior, right? Deep-seated hatred, tit for tat. But Jesus taught us differently. Jesus told us not to retaliate an eye for an eye, but rather, Jesus says, have ye not heard that it had been said, an eye for an eye? But I say unto thee that ye resist not evil, but whosoever shall smite thee on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if any will sue thee at the law, take away thy coat, and let him have thy cloak also. And whosoever shall compel thee a mile, go with him twain. Give to him that asketh thee, and from him that borrow from thee, turn not thou away. During our camp, we had a film, Sabina, and it was the practice of such a law that this Romanian couple did by loving the German soldiers. And the German soldiers killed her entire family. And yet the Lord enabled her to, in the sense, forgive the German soldier, and not only forgive, but showed her love for them. They were wreaking great havoc at that time. But of course, for Sabina and her husband, they were able, as Christian missionaries, they were able to help these German soldiers who were fleeing the Russians at the end of the war. Right? They were all very surprised. Why would you do such a thing? I'm your enemy, you know. I have done you so much wrong, and yet you are doing this to me to save my life. So he was showing forth the love of Christ. And here you see for Samson, he was a man that is unreformed. Right? He was a carnal Christian, we say that he has the Word of God, and yet it was not, imbibed in the heart, and it was not practiced. So we see here how Samson, by subtlety, by malice, by what he did, caused mayhem. Mayhem. Verse 12. Reform for battle, our third thought. And they said to him, we come now to bind thee, that we may deliver thee into the hand of the Philistines. And Samson said, swear unto me that ye may not fall upon me yourselves. So what happened after what Samson did? The Philistines came and to his brethren and looked for Samson to pay for the damage that he had done. And at that time, Israel was under Philistines' rule, or Philistine subjection. And so none of his brethren stood up for him, but they said to him, no, but we will bind thee fast, verse 13, and deliver thee into their hand, but surely we will not kill thee. And they bound him with 2 cords and brought him up against from the rock. And when he came to Lehi, the Philistines shouted against him. God raised Samson to deliver Israel from the oppression of the Philistines. The people of Judah were obviously content with the Philistine domination, but resent the disturbance that is caused by Samson's feud with them. He was basely betrayed and delivered up by the men of Judah. As Matthew Henry says, degenerate branches of that valiant tribe blamed him for what he had done against the Philistines, as if he had done them a great injury. But you notice how Samson responded. He tamely yielded to be bound by his countrymen and delivered into the hands of the enraged Philistine. Very much like a picture of Christ when he was being betrayed by his own countrymen, by even his own disciple, to be bound up to go to the cross. Of course, Samson could have used his strength to fight, but he did not. He yielded himself to his brethren to go. He didn't want to make trouble, and you would be able to see from the aspect of what has taken place that Samson was, in a sense, quite a different person from the strength that he exhibited outwardly. Right? Ray Pritchard observed insightfully, he says, Samson slaughtered the Philistines. Then he went down and stayed in a cave in the rock of Etam. All you see so far is revenge, 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 and revenge. Now, Samson goes and stays in a cave in the rock of Etam. That seems odd. Why hide in a cave? Because he's scared of the Philistines. He observed well here. He says that there's a strange thing that is happening. He was a violent killer in his heart, yet he's scared to death of the Philistines. And he says, scared of what? They are going to do to him because of what he has done to them. And he says, perhaps there's something that is going on here, which he says I cannot prove, but I do believe that the beginning of a spiritual turnaround in Samson's life took place in the cave of Etam while he was hiding from the Philistines. Something took place. I believe he, like David, would come after him, began to think about his life and his background and the kind of family that he had and his goodly heritage. And I think Samson began to re-evaluate the course of his life and say that because as soon as Samson come out of the cave, his life is beginning to change. He was going from top down, down, down. He was making an unending series of stupid decisions. Now he has become nothing more than a violent, bloodthirsty, terrorist kind of a killer. He was at the bottom now. When he comes out of the cave, he acts like a different man. Right? Our text tells us that when the Spirit of God came upon him, right, there was a change in him. Right? The distress which Samson was in after what he had done, you would be able to notice that Samson was able, right, to go against the enemy, and when he was brought alone to the enemy camp, God gave him special strength to not be a menace, but rather be a man, right, to go against the enemy. And God gave him a jawbone of an ass, in which, with that as a weapon, he was able to slaughter 1,000 of the enemy soldiers. So he fought bravely. He fought bravely, and he used all his strength in that fight. And he was so thirsty. He was totally exhausted. And the Lord brought water out of the jawbone, out of the cleft of the hollow of the jawbone. The Lord nourished him. And that was when his spirit came back to him again. The Lord was with him in that battle. there was a change that took place. Well, we thank the Lord that the Lord did deliver him, right? Deliver him, and we would see in Samson's life a man that is very much after an unsanctified passion, a sanctified kind of life, and yet you see how he had great strength. If only he had used his strength in a greater manner for the good of his people.